I'm really happy to welcome to the podcast Seth Barron. Seth is the managing editor of The American Mind, a publication of the Claremont Institute. He's also a writer for City Journal, which is published by the Manhattan Institute. He's an inveterate New Yorker, and he's written an important book, which is called The Last Days of New York. Seth, welcome to the podcast. I lived in New York for 2 years, really 2010 to 2012. And New York appeared at that time to be kind of on the edge of a bit of a precipice. But by which I mean that it had come off the glory days of the Giuliani years with Bill Bratton as the police commissioner and then Bloomberg. But something seemed to be going wrong with New York. And then, of course, later we had COVID. Tell us what you think was the tipping point, if there was one, for New York, or have we had a gradually building catastrophe? What's your diagnosis?
Well, I would say that Bill de Blasio came to power at the end of 2013, but it wasn't just him. There was a whole set of progressive politicians, a whole coterie of what I call the progressive ascendancy, who rose to power at the same time. And they had a pretty radical agenda for changing New York and going in a different direction from where it had been. They wanted to end certain police practices that they thought were racist and overbearing. And more important, or as importantly, they sought to remove wealth inequality and income inequality. They had sort of a socialistic plan to eliminate the gap between what de Blasio called the tale of two cities, the haves and the have-nots. He also wanted to change the way housing worked, education, homelessness. He had a very grand project. This sort of went the way a lot of socialist revolutions go. It didn't work out as they wanted.
Now, you said that they wanted to change the way things were in New York. Now, New York has been, of course, New York City in Democratic hands for a long time. New York State, as I understand it, at least in the past, had a certain kind of equilibrium between the liberal or Democratic power of the city versus the Republican, at least tempering influence of upstate New York. Was there some kind of fundamental shift in which the left, in a sense, got the whole, not only the whole city, but they got control, it seems, of the whole state? How did that occur?
Well, remember 30 years ago, Giuliani was elected, and he was a Republican, but, sort of what we used to call like a Rockefeller Republican. His, socially fairly liberal, but good on fiscal stuff and very pro-law and order. 30 years ago, though, New York was a different city. Demographically, morally, politically. Since then, and then Giuliani ruled for 8 years, and under him, crime took a huge dip down. He brought Bill Bratton in as the police commissioner, and they instituted, broken window policing, which isn't as harsh as people try to make it sound. It's really just the idea being that crime breeds in a condition of disorder. So if you establish public order and safe streets, everything follows from that. After Giuliani, Bloomberg came in. He had a challenging first year or two because of 9/11, but he continued to drive crime down with pretty active policing. De Blasio came in and reversed a lot of those policing practices, and we didn't see an immediate spike in crime, but the stage was set, and many of us predicted that there would eventually be an increase in violent crime, and indeed there has been.
And not just crime, because de Blasio, of course, said notoriously that there is plenty of money. It's just in the wrong hands. And I take this to be kind of a socialist mantra, because they're assuming when they say that wealth needs to be redistributed, that there was some pre-existing distribution. So in other words, that people don't earn money, they don't create wealth by making new businesses and so on, but rather there's some original distribution. It's unjust, and therefore one can blueprint or pre-plan a kind of more ideal distribution. Is this the kind of demented philosophy that's driving? I mean, New York, of course, has been a city creating great wealth and symbolizing great wealth. And did these people set to sort of take down that system?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought up that quote, which he devised for his presidential campaign as a kind of, punchline that was supposed to get a lot of applause. It didn't really work. But yes, absolutely. He's been a redistributionist since the beginning. A few years ago, he said, if I had my druthers, I would be in control of every square inch of real estate in New York City and decide what it was for and who got to live there and all of that. Even things like very recently he said that screening for entry to sixth grade, like middle school screening, he said, help me eliminate this and help me redistribute wealth. Everything is cast in terms of redistribution of wealth. And in regard to this idea that it's rectification of a purer state, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez very almost violently opposed Amazon coming to New York City a couple of years ago to set up its East Coast headquarters. And she was angry that they were going to receive about $3 billion over 20 years in tax abatements. And after they pulled out because of opposition, she said, well, now we can use that $3 billion for schools or social programs. But that $3 billion never existed. It was just an abatement on taxes that Amazon would have paid on wealth that they created by coming to New York and paying people high salaries and so forth. So this is the kind of inverted, like you said, demented thinking that animates the left.
When we come back, I want to dive more deeply into all this, and I want to ask Seth Barron the simple question: Is this why people come to New York? Don't they come for opportunity instead of for wealth redistribution? We'll be right back.